Guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. My, um, my voice is gradually, slowly coming back. Yay. Just wanted to give you a verbal heads up on the schedule for next week. I'm going to be, for fall break, I'm going to be traveling to West Virginia to call an auction for a military veteran charity. And so Wednesday, Lindsay and Grace are going to do, I'm going to post a lecture. I'm going to do levers on some of the muscles that we do in the hip, because seeing thirds and seconds really work well with some of our hip muscles. So I'm going to make a lecture and post it on Wednesday. But Lindsay and Grace are going to do kind of a special session for students that just need a refresher on agonist, motion, control, just that system. Because I think Lindsay has a really good, clean external form. I mean, it's basically what we say, but just a standard system that I think could help some of you to walk yourself down the path of getting these answers more consistently correct. So in addition, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be on a Zoom. So I'll be, during class time, I'll have a class Zoom. I'll send you the link for any questions about that or any questions about the lever lecture. So we'll make sure to get you guys covered. I'm not worried about y'all. Y'all going to be fine. It's time to get to the hip. Okay. Before we get into specific muscles, I want to explain a concept that we've talked about before, a mirror concept. The mirror concept is, if I have a mirror and my left side does this, my right side, or the mirror is going to do this. But if my left side goes out, the mirror isn't going to come with me. The same motion, it's going to go away from me. If your mirror goes with you, you have a possessed mirror. That's not normal. So remember in 310, it's the concept that these are not the same motions. These are the same motions. The doors spin two different ways globally, but they have the same spin locally, because that's opening and closing the doors. Okay, that's the first point. The second point is, for our cervical and trunk, all we needed was one circle. But we're about to get into extremities. For our neck and our trunk, we have one neck, we have one trunk, and we have a right side and a left side. Well, now we have two sides. And what do we call sides of sides? We call that lateral and medial, and they are mirrors of each other. Now, I have good news and bad news. The good news is we don't have to learn two circles for my right and my left hip. That would be very confusing, because the muscles that would be on the right side of this one would be on the left side of that one, because of the mirror effect. They would both be lateral. But if you're trying to memorize two mirror circles, that gets crazy. So this is what we do. Easy fix. We just basically say, we're going to learn all of the extremity muscles from the right side. Because the same muscles you have on your right side, you have on your left. It's the same muscle. We're not fiddler crabs. We don't have like one specialized muscle on one side of the body than not. Meaning, if you're doing an exercise on your left hip, and you say, all right, what muscles are these? And you're like, okay, external force, agonist, those are my left hip abduction pullers. Those are my abductors. It's going to be the same muscles on this side. So who are my abductors? Does that make sense? In other words, when you refer to your circles, it's just for a reference, to remember the abductors, flexors, extensors, adductors, internal and external rotators. And it's the same muscles that you have on your right and your left. So you can still use a right-sided circle to reference left-sided muscles, because they're the same muscles and they pull the same way. But if we were to double down on two separate circles, they would be mirrors of each other. That's like trying to learn how to read forward and then learn how to read in a mirror when it's backwards. That's tough. So I'm explaining that this circle right here is your right hip, and that's all you're going to have to learn, because your left hip has the same muscles as your right hip. And if we're doing a left hip exercise and you identify you need your flexors or your left hip, you can still reference the flexors on your right hip circle. It's the same muscles. We're good? All right. So I'm just going to, what do they call it when you download a bunch of information? That's what we're going to do. Look at all this. This is what you're responsible for. For those of you that don't circle, for those of you watching from home, on the side is your PDFs for your hip. I straight up tell you, these are the muscles, and these are the specific functions of each muscle that you're going to be accounting for. You can then learn it like that. You can put them in groups. We'll do it. Or you can learn your cross-sectional circles, the ones that pull forward, back, outside, inside, spin, spin. Or a combination of all three. This is going to be your first lecture where we're going to have areas of muscles that do certain things that other areas don't. You guys know this before, upper chest, upper pec. It's because there's certain fibers of this fan that pull in directions that all the other fibers may not pull. So we're going to have like anterior fibers of some hip muscles that pull in certain transverse planes that the vertical fibers don't. That's all that is. The hip has a lot of muscles. It's for two main reasons. One is to move all the stuff on top of us takes force, but also stability. One of the lessons you're going to hear now that we're into extremities is muscles aren't just made for movement. They're made to keep bones articulating with bones. Isn't that what ligaments do? Ligaments help. But if you just rely on ligaments, we need those muscles to help stabilize as well, okay? So for your hip, having a dislocated hip, bad day. Maybe not for our generation, but it's still a bad day. But what I mean is we have medical advances and we have artificial hips, but our ancestors, if you had a dislocated hip, love you, Grandpa. But that was a bad day. So it makes sense that our bodies want to protect that joint with a lot of strong muscles that cross in all of these different areas, try to splint, maintain that hip integrity. Yeah, dislocated hip, it's a bad day. So let's look at the class. And when I say the class, like the classroom, it's a big class. How many of you went to like a 5A school, like had a big class? Okay. I went to a small school. Okay. I graduated with 40 people. My dad graduated with 8. It's a big class. But even though it's a big class, it still follows the same rules of a small class. You're going to have students sitting in the front and the back, on the lateral side and the medial side. And you're going to have, in PE, a lot of students trying to spin the merry-go-round. The one new thing to these circles is you see some of the students, they don't all sit front, back, right, left. Some of them sit like in the middle of class. Some of them sit right on the line to the front, meaning they're neither to the right nor to the left. They're right in the middle. They're neither to the front or to the back. They're right in the middle. So that's going to be something neat. When we have a muscle that only crosses in the front and it doesn't cross lateral or medial, meaning it's not an abduction or an adduction puller, it's just a hip flexion puller, it's going to sit right on the fence. It's going to sit on the axis. So you're going to have some of these muscles that sit on the axis, meaning they're neither flexors nor extensors. They're just abductors or adductors. They are neither abductors nor adductors. They're just flexors or extensors. That's all that means. All right, let's break the ice. First muscles we're going to talk about at the hip. And we're also, again, when I do my lecture, not only on Wednesday, not only will I record about the levers, but also pulleys, because there's a lot of good pulley systems down here too. All right, guys. Our first muscle we're going to talk about is our iliopsoas. Probably of you some aware, like your calf muscle, how your gastroc and your soleus blend into one common tendon. That's your Achilles. Very similar. You have your iliacus. This is the ilium. You see this red part. This muscle originates from the ilium. And then you have these psoas muscles that originate from your lumbar vertebra back here. For a muscle to function at a joint, it has to cross a joint. In other words, it has to, if I had a string and I wanted to influence my wrist, the string has to cross my wrist in order to pull it in my wrist, to make my wrist. Then specifically to the motion, it's how does it cross? Crossing the back, front, outside, inside. Too many times, origin and insertion gets in the way of function. This is a great example of what of that. What Campbell doesn't mean is origin and insertion is not important. Some of you, you're going to have to know origin and insertion when you're palpating things, massage therapy. But origin and insertion alone does not tell you function. This is a good example of why. We have psoas muscles that actually start off posterior. And their insertion, if you guys remember from biology lab, you have these two trochanters, this greater and lesser trochanters. So here's a muscle, the psoas, who has a posterior origin and a posterior insertion, because your lesser trochanter is in the back of the femur. So if all I did was say, oh, it starts in the back and it ends in the back, why wouldn't I assume that it would pass back here to get there? But it doesn't. It comes from the front. And it wraps around the femur. That's what a pulley is. I'm going to explain that with classes of pulleys. So because it crosses the hip in the front, it doesn't matter that it started in the back of the spine. It doesn't matter that it inserts in the back of the femur. The fact that it crosses the hip in the front is why it's a flexion. It's how it crosses that gives it function. Does that make sense? And because function is based off of how muscles cross the joint, it should make sense why our cross-sectional anatomy is the most important thing. How do those muscles cross the hip? It doesn't matter where they start. It doesn't matter where they end. It's how they cross, which is going to determine how they pull. Again, origin insertions have their place. Guys, that's geography. You might could just memorize states and capitals. That's the easy part. That's just go and memorize some stuff. So the iliopsoas, you have these two psoas muscles, and it blends in with the ilium, and we call that the iliacus, and we call that the iliopsoas. Crosses the hip anteriorly, passes over that femoral head. There's a pulley action there that I'm going to explain in class, and inserts in that lesser trochanter to the back. So it should make sense that it's a hip flexion point. I'm going to talk about its third class function on Wednesday, but I just want you to kind of look at this picture and you see, well, man, how do I even see where that muscle is? Sometimes these pictures are great to just show you all the muscles, but you have so many muscles that are overlapping, and this one's deep and super, you can't see. So we got to get those out of there. We got to get those out of there. And you got to be kidding me. It's going to be the last one, isn't it, guys? Look at that. Look at that. What does Campbell always preach? A two-dimensional picture is very tough to see a three-dimensional concept. So from this picture, it's really kind of hard to see how those psoas are coming from the back of the spine, wrapping around the hip, and then going to the back of the femur. But again, it's where does it cross? It crosses in the front, and that's why it's a flexion. Now we're going to use some common sense here because I'm planting leverage seeds. Femur's a long bone, right? Hey, Granny, come say hi. Turn its pitch. You okay? Oh, yeah. Doing well, man. Good to see you. Okay. Oh. All right. Think of this. Think of this. Think of this. Think of this. Femur's a long bone, longest bone in the body, right? You have a muscle that's inserting very close to the femoral head. That lesser trochanter is, look at that, that's not far from the head. Common sense, guys. You guys know so much physics. You do. If I had a rope attached to this point right here, all I would have to do is contract or shorten a little bit of muscle distance to create a huge sweeping range of motion on the other end. That's leverage. Leverage specifically for speed and range of motion. So in other words, a sprinter who's trying to flex their hips as fast as possible, that would be a great muscle to use. Because a small change in the front close creates a big change far away. It's like stepping on a rake. A small change on the front close to the axis creates a big change the distal part. Okay? For the purposes of this class, because they have the same function, they blend into the same tendon, and they insert in the same way, and they pull the same place, we're going to refer to this muscle as the iliopsoas. So on your circle or on your list, you'll see iliopsoas. Also, I want you to notice the anterior crossing. It sits in the front, but it's not prominent laterally or medially, so it's not going to have like an abduction or adduction. And additionally, it's right on the axis, crosses right in the axis. So in other words, it doesn't matter that it's medial to like the neck or medial to the trochanters. It's about the anterior posterior axis that runs through the ball. What it's about. I just want to give you all an example. So that would be this one, IPS, iliopsoas. So I think this slide, what I meant is, look at all these muscles all together. That's crazy. We have to look at them one at a time. Look at all that. That's all confusing, overlapping. Where's one start? Where does one end? It's hard to see cross. We got to get all that stuff out of there and just look at them. All right, I'm just going to go down. Sometimes I get excited. So, how many of you have heard about rotator cuff at the shoulder, right? Okay. Well, the hip has a version, that's all it is, a lower extremity of rotator cuff muscles, specifically to pull in a direction of rotation and to provide some stability, some lateral stability. You have the gemella superior inferior, obturator internus externus, quadratus femoris, and then everybody's favorite piriformis. I want you to look at how those muscles cross. See. First of all, from anatomy lab, is this a posterior or an anterior view? Are we looking from the back or the front? Good. It's posterior view. Let's see if this will do. Sorry if I'm off my game, guys. I've been sick. Second week now. Turning. The posterior view. And those muscles can only pull, as we know. I'm going to try and do this, even though it doesn't show up. It's probably just for the best. So look how cool. Apple, banana, strawberry, sledgehammer. All of these muscles are pulling like across, except for this one that kind of has in other words, east-west, 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 northeast, or northwest. Does that make sense? So basically what you have is, see, this is a left, I need a right. Okay. So basically what you have is externals, all of them are externals, and then when you get to the piriformis has an angle. It has obliquity to it. And that obliquity, the X component is going to be a lateral rotator, but the Y component is going to be an abductor. Crosses laterally, crosses over the top. So it's an abductor and an external rotator. Does that make sense? Now, the piriformis famously has a lot of issues with sciatic nerve because the sciatic nerve branches off, and this is what's really cool. Some people, this isn't going to be on your test, but I'll just take 30 seconds to give you what's coming in your future studies. Some people, that sciatic nerve passes under it. Some people passes over it. Some people it passes through it. And that piriformis muscle, if it's tight, or a combination of being tight and you sitting on it for extended periods of time, can irritate that nerve. So, another thing that's really cool about the piriformis, and this is your first example of reversal of muscle function based off of your position. So all of your circles are from anatomical. In anatomical position, these are how these muscles fall. Piriformis is going to be roughly like this, lateral and external. Okay? Check this out. If you ever notice when people do a piriformis stretch, they want to flex their hip and they actually want to externally rotate their hip. So you're like, well, wait, if piriformis is an external rotator, why would we want to externally rotate our hip? Because we can switch the function of certain muscles based off of our hip position. So watch this. Anatomical position, this is how it runs. Laterally, externally. But if I flex my hip, notice now, all of the run is lateral. In other words, there's no more spin. Here, it was trying to spin. But if I flex my hip, now it's running with the femur. Does that make sense? Now watch what happens. If I keep flexing, now it's actually trying to internally rotate me. How cool is that? So if it's trying to internally rotate me in this new hip position, it would make sense that I would stretch it by externally rotating when my hip is flexed. That is not going to be on your test. I'm giving you insight to, we can take muscles and reposition their function based off of what will be on your test is when we do it with the brachioradialis, we're going to switch its function for the radioulnar joint. So I'm introducing you to the fact that not every muscle can keep its function in different positions. It's rare, but it can happen. So let's look at these lateral rotators or external rotators. This is how we put them in our circles. If something is on an axis, that means it doesn't have an effect on that joint that that axis represents. We did the iliopsoas. The iliopsoas crosses the bilateral axis. That's why it's a flexion puller, but it doesn't cross the AP axis. So in theory, if you had a muscle that was on both axes, in other words, if a student sat right in the middle of class, they are neither in the front or the back. They are neither on the lateral or medial side. So these muscles that are in this circle are literally sitting in both axes, meaning they're not flexors, extensors, nor abductors or adductors. All they are lateral rotators. Does that make sense? And who are, yes, ma'am?
So there are external rotators on the right hip, but they would also be external rotators in the left hip.
You have the same muscles doing the same thing. It's just that if we drew a second circle, it would be a mirror of this. You'd have this little circle inside, and you'd have an arrow on this side. But because if on the test, if I say, what muscles do this? And you say, oh, that would be lateral rotators on the left hip. Who are those muscles? The same muscles on the right side. So you can still use your right-sided reference to see left-sided muscles. Because all this is saying is, what do they do? How do they pull? Who are they? So GS, gemellus superior, gemellus inferior, obturator internus, obturator externus, quadratus femoris. Now, those muscles, you may be like, when will I ever use those muscles? You will. Because when you have a car that has a lot of different pieces, any of those pieces can have a problem with it. Like a mechanic doesn't just know how one piece works. So it's similar. Like someone may have a strain of the gemellus inferior. You need to know what that muscle does. Someone may have a contracture of the quadratus femoris. You need to know what that muscle does. So I try to give it to you several ways. I try to show you, hey, look at how that muscle would be pulling laterally in the transverse plane. Notice how it's not pulling on like the femur, like it's not on the neck. It's not trying to bring the femur in laterally or over the top. It's just a lateral rotator. It's trying to translate. It's trying to keep the femoral head in like a rotator cuff muscle would. So I show you, and we even do it, we even separate it. Hey, look at that obturator externus. Look at that lateral pull, lateral rotation pull, that external rotation. Look at that lateral external rotation pull. Is another example of, this muscle actually starts more on the pubis, but it crosses the hip laterally. So we do it collectively, and then we do it one at a time. And then the sledgehammer, or the different one, same pull, look at the vertical. I mean the horizontal, 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 horizontal. And then all of a sudden we got the horizontal / lateral. Piriformis. The piriformis angles. The piriformis crosses the hip lateral. Piriformis does this. So here are our lateral rotators. Piriformis does this. This part, the X component, and then the Y component. Together, the Y and the X, basic trigonometry. Y component, X component. That makes sense? So the piriformis is a abductor and external or lateral rotator. And let's look at how it would sit in the circle. I'm going to die one day because I'm not organized. But what a way to go. What a way to do it. I hope it gets on TikTok or whatever. All right. What I want you to see is, if I tell you the piriformis is an abductor and external rotator, that's what this means. It crosses laterally. It's not on the axis. It's a lateral crossing muscle, meaning it's an abduction puller, and it's trying to spin the merry-go-round laterally. Make sense? So there are lateral rotators and our piriformis. This is what I was telling you guys about the sciatic nerve. It's different in different people. All right, let's go to our glutes. Our gluteus medius and minimus. I love precedent. I'm sure you guys have heard of gastrocnemius and soleus before. And again, on my Wednesday lecture where I talk about pulleys and levers, I just think that'll make more sense if I give you examples first and then say, hey, remember this? This is how this works. So there's certain pulleys in the body where a muscle that's more deep helps another muscle have a better pull being on top of it. It's like a piggyback. The soleus is deep and the gastroc sits on top of it. So the gastroc gets a better angle of pull thanks to the soleus. So this is very similar. You have the gluteus medius and minimus. And the minimus is deep and the medius piggybacks on top of it. So in other words, you couldn't see this one unless we got that one out of the way. Okay. So a certain class of pulley, class pulley. Now, what does the gluteus medius and minimus do? Guys, this is like your deltoid of your hip. And you know how, not exactly the same, but you know how your deltoid is one muscle, but we have areas like anterior deltoid, posterior deltoid. Those aren't separate muscles. Those are parts of the fan, upper chest, upper pec. Fan-shaped muscles, it's really cool about fan-shaped muscles. All of the fibers have to have something in common, but not all of the fibers have to have everything in common. I'm going to do that one more time. All the fibers have to have something in common, but not all of the fibers have to have everything in common. So in other words, something you're familiar with. Anterior, middle, and posterior delts have abduction pull all in common. But the anterior has a different sagittal pull than the posterior, and the anterior has a different transverse pull than the posterior. But they can cancel out sagittal and transverse to work together frontally. Very similar. Gluteus medius and minimus, you have this fan, but it doesn't cover as much ground as the deltoid. What I mean by that is the deltoid has front, middle, back. For your hip, this is your origin of your gluteus medius and minimus. So pretty much you have like a vertical and you have an anterior. I'm going to say that again in a different way. Your gluteus medius and minimus is like your deltoid without a posterior. There's no seashell back here. Like your seashell, your pelvis is like here. So we don't have a posterior part of our gluteus medius and minimus. For our deltoid, we have our spine and our scapula back there. Chromium and our collarbone. So think of the gluteus medius and minimus as kind of like a broken seashell where you have vertical fibers and you have anterior fibers. But we don't have posterior fibers. So the gluteus medius and minimus crosses the hip laterally. Crosses on the outside. So right away, you should be, well, if it crosses the hip laterally, I know muscle function is based off of pull, abduction, pull. Big time abduction pull. And not just when we're doing Jane Fonda straight leg raises. Guys, when you're walking and you're weight bearing, when you're on your right leg, you need abductors to prevent you from falling. So your gluteus medius and minimus. Minimus is on the inside, medius is on the outside. Now let's talk about our anterior fibers. The anterior deltoid, I'm only using that as an analogy because it's something we know. The anterior fibers of the deltoid are internal rotation pullers. So why wouldn't the anterior fibers of the gluteus medius and minimus also be internal rotation and medial rotation pullers at the feet? Yeah. Make sense? Now, here's where it gets, I'll say confusing or tricky, but we just have to make sure we're on the same page. This is why you study. South Louisiana is still Louisiana. The anterior fibers of the gluteus medius and minimus is still gluteus medius and minimus. The posterior fibers of your deltoid is still deltoid. Does that make sense? So what I mean is, on the test, when we say first world problem. When we say left deltoid, that's saying all the fibers, the whole state, everything. When I say anterior deltoid, I'm specifically talking about a region of the state, a region of the muscle. South Louisiana, North Louisiana, Central Louisiana. Very important what I'm about to tell you. The gluteus medius and minimus are abduction pullers. All the fibers are abductors. But the middle fibers are not internal rotators. Only the anterior fibers are internal rotation pullers. Only the anterior fibers. So on the test, and I'm trying to explain why we can't say it. On the test, if I say the gluteus medius is an internal rotator, that's not true because that would be saying all the fibers are. And I know that sounds picky, but it's important. We have to know where these fibers on these fan-shaped muscles pull. So the anterior fibers. So on the circle, you need to make a note. You need to star it. You need to make a note that that arrow, that internal rotation pull is only with only with the fibers that can pull that well. Vertical fibers can't try to spin me. That's like saying a rectus abdominis can try to spin it. No, it has to have obliqueness. It has to have angle to it. Only the anterior fibers. Cool? All right, let's do our last abductor. This is one of my favorite muscles. Anybody do track and field or cross country or distance running? This is a common muscle that my track athletes used to struggle with. The tensor fasciae, TFL. This is a great example of two-dimensional pictures being limited in function. All right. So let's call back to Dr. George. So the tensor fasciae lata is a muscle that gets a lot of work. A lot of work. We recruited a lot. And it also blends into this big, thick lateral band called the iliotibial band, the IT band on the outside of our leg. If you look at, we're going to look at different views, but if you look at this front view, I'm sorry, this would be a side view. I'm hoping you can see how the tensor fasciae lata crosses the hip anteriorly relative to the hip joint. So in other words, this would be the bilateral axis. Crosses in the front, meaning a hip flexion puller. That's not a good view to see how it crosses laterally or medially, or like that's a limited view. If all you did was see that view, we couldn't see the other poles. So let's look at a different view. Let's look at a front to back view of the same muscle. Well, now we can see how, whoa, it also has a lateral view, a lateral pulse. Now this is a posterior view, right? So it doesn't change the fact that it's crossing in the front. You can actually see how it crosses in the front, the fact that we can't see the muscle here. But I wanted to specifically show you the lateralness. There's our anterior, posterior axis. So hip flexor and hip abductor. I have this view. This is one of the things, Grace, that I regret. I don't regret, no regrets. But doing the trig helps to show how, even though it doesn't look like it's much, it's more than. I'm going to do that once. The tensor fasciae lata aids the anterior fibers, the gluteus medius and minimus, in being internal rotation pullers. It doesn't look like it's much, but it's enough. What I mean by that is it has obliquity to it. So the vertical component of that is trying to internally rotate the femur. Dr. George used to refer to this as the pocket muscle. Now, trig, we learned from trigonometry about sides and angles. If we actually did this and we said a force of 100 pounds at an angle of 75 degrees, if we did the trig, the x component would be more than what you think it is. It's the magic of trigonometry, because it's squared. Because things are squared, a squared, b squared, c squared. So our eyes are like, man, that doesn't seem like it's a lot of internal rotation. It doesn't, because we think in linear terms. Trigonometry is exponential terms, squared. So it's more internal rotation pull than it looks, is what I'm trying to get you to see. It's more than it looks, and that's because of the trigonometry. What do you think this big guy's going to do? Internal or external? It's going to be a big, powerful external, right? It's kind of why we don't need our gluteus medius and minimus to have posterior fibers, because you got your big old gluteus maximus that's like, I got you. What did it say, fam? Is that how they say it? I think that's what my boys say. They call me a boomer. I guess I'm a boomer. Yeah, gluteus medius and minimus, we don't need you. We got the biggest, powerful muscle in the body. We got it. All right, so let's summarize what we have so far. Guys, we're going to take it slow. However, I always want you to know that I have previous lectures on my channel. Actually, I think I posted them on your Moodle page. So if I'm having a bad day and I've been sick and I haven't been on my A game, go watch the spring lecture, or maybe I was more on my A game. What I love about this stuff is it doesn't change. That's what I love about this stuff. Physiology, look, bless their hearts. But good Lord, does that story change as we learn more about things we can't see? we're never going to be like, hey, remember what we thought the bicep did? Boy, were we off. So we talked about the iliopsoas. I wanted to give you an initial right off the bat muscle that's easy to see based off of cross and pull. Then we went to our primary spinners, external rotators that are like sharpshooters. I like to think of sharpshooters, maybe in other sports, but in basketball, I had these friends, and I play against guys who literally just stood in one place and got the ball and just shot. That's all they did. It's kind of like these. That's their job. They're lateral external rotators. That's what they do. That's what they do well. Piriformis has a little bit more versatility to its game. It can shoot, but it could also defend, or it could do other things. It's an abductor external rotator. On Monday, we're going to talk about gluteus maximus, big, powerful extensor external rotator. And then we talked about the gluteus medius and minimus, two muscles that overlap each other. And the fibers run vertical and anterior. It's like having a middle and anterior deltoid at the hip. We don't have posterior fibers because I don't need posterior fibers. But, put it bluntly, all of the fibers are abductors, but only the anterior fibers are internal rotators. And then a complementary muscle is the tensor fasciae latae, very important muscle. It's a flexor, abductor, and internal rotator. Blends into the iliotibial band, which runs down the lateral part of the leg. Why is that important? When you go to cut and plant, having that lateral band to help protect your knee from buckling. Little bites of the apple. But you should be able to say, by the time your test comes, what's the function of the left tensor fasciae latae? Well, guess what? The left one does the exact same thing my right one does. So my right one is a flexor abductor internal rotator. And it's going to pull the same way as my left. The gluteus medius and minimus on the left side has the same function as the right side. It's just a mirror effect. So it's easier to just learn a right-sided circle as opposed to trying to double up and learn a mirror effect of two circles. That's too confusing. It's the same muscle. Good? All right, guys. Got to go.